Welcome, Game Chasers everywhere, to episode 41 of The Collecting Confidant with your host, GunstarHero. And I'm back this week with a trio of retro-inspired action platformers. Originally, I was going to call this another episode of the Solar News Report, but I feel that I'm just going to kind of stick with one type of show, not multiple show titles going forward. And basically, if I'm just doing one game or multiple games, I'll let you know beforehand if it's a review, a preview, or impressions of a demo. So today, we're going to be covering two demos of games that are yet to be released, as well as a classic platformer that is getting a re-release via Fangamer. For all of you who missed out on the previous limited run release and are afraid of those high prices, definitely some treats in store for you. So let's get to our first game on the docket, which is forthcoming Q1 2023. Currently has a demo on Steam. This is Shinobi Non Grata, which was developed by Studio PICO in conjunction with Esquadra Inc. and was published by Flyhigh Works. Again, is currently available in demo format for Steam only, but is going to be getting releases for PS4, Switch, and Steam sometime in the next few months. Not currently disclosed in terms of a real date, but you can play the demo and at least get impressions of the game before, of course, doing your pre-order for the physical copy on PS4 and Switch only via strictlylimitedgames.com. I'll be getting into those buying options shortly, but let's talk about this very cool homage to 80s, 90s hack and slash ninja platforming games. And this one is a beauty because I would basically describe this as kind of a mashup between Shinobi and Ninja Gaiden, two of my favorite games from the era, especially Ninja Gaiden, which I've said before is one of my ultimate all-time favorite games. And Shinobi Non Grata definitely retains a lot of the cool elements that made Ninja Gaiden and Shinobi popular. So this, of course, is a 2D retro-styled action platformer where you play as Kana, who is essentially a descendant of a long line of shinobis that specialized in demon hunting. And what's happened, basically the story setup is that this is set in the early 1800s during the Tenpo period of Japan, which was an incredibly tumultuous period in the country's history. And what's happening now is that there is this clan known as the Oboro Itu clan, which is partnered up with demons to basically overthrow the government. So you now as Kana, which translated in Japan literally means skilled with arms, you now have to go and fight off the demons after having suffered this terrible accident and having suffered amnesia. So that's basically the story setup. And according to the developer blog on Steam, there's going to be two more unlockable characters that are going to join in your quest as well. So a lot of exciting stuff there. Mechanically, the game's pretty simple. You have your standard run, jump, and double jump, plus you have your slashing sword attack with your trusty blade known as the Murasame. And then, of course, you can also do somersault attacks that provide you temporary invulnerability when trying to dodge enemy attacks. So there's definitely a lot of kinetic fluid motion. The controls are very tight. But then on top of that, you have up to 7 unlockable Shinobi sub-weapons. 3 of these will be available from the outset, and over the course of the game, you'll have to unlock the additional 4 to get the 7, and you'll have limited ammunition to be able to use these sub-attacks as in these older games, so you'll have to smash through lanterns and objects to collect more points to be able to use these sub-weapons. And I find that as with old games like Shinobi and Ninja Gaiden, it's best to try to save these action points for your boss battles, which get very tough. Now, this game, I don't know a lot about the development and history of it because the details are very scant. I did see a few points from the developer Pico, who described this as an homage to Soulsborne games. So essentially that means there's going to be no power-ups, no leveling up. It's going to be up to you and your skill with platforming and being able to recognize patterns of enemy attacks and also resource management to overcome these hordes of demons and fight these quite difficult boss battles, which I found were manageable, not too crazy, but still provided enough of a challenge for skilled players. So I'm definitely excited about what I'm seeing here. I found the gameplay very kinetic, very engrossing. The chiptune soundtrack was excellent. And again, if you want to get this physically on either the PS4 or Switch. You can now pre-order it via strictlylimitedgames.com. There's going to be two versions. Of course, there'll be the standard version for $29.99 US, which will have either the cart or the disc and the manual. But then, if you're really into this game, you can also get the special limited edition for $49.99 US, which is going to include the collector-style big box, a CD soundtrack, necklace, replica of the Murasame sword, and a few other goodies. So those are up for pre-order now, and as with any strictly limited release, they don't have a pre-order deadline, but just a certain amount of copies remaining, and those are going fast. So if you've played the demo, you enjoy what you see, and you're looking forward to the full release and want to have this physically, you may want to act sooner than later. So that is Shinobi Non Grata. Really looking forward to this. Again, if you're a fan of the old school 80s, 90s ninja platforming games, this will be right up your alley. Stay tuned because we're coming back with another demo of a forthcoming game. This will be for fans of gothic horror games. Specifically, if you love Castlevania and Bloodstained Curse of the Moon, you're going to be in for a treat here. Stay tuned. And we're back on the Collecting Confidant episode 41 with our trio of retro-inspired action platforming games. The first game, of course, was a demo for Shinobi Non Grata, which is coming out later this year for fans of Shinobi Ninja Gaiden. And then up next, we have another 2D retro-inspired action platformer, which is more for fans of Castlevania and the more recently released Bloodstained Curse of the Moon. That game's excellent. You got to try if you haven't played it. But of course, the game we're talking about now is called Grim Guardians Demon Purge, which is coming out on February 23rd, 2023 for the PS4, PS5, the Switch, Xbox One / Series X and S, and of course Steam. And if you want to play it a bit early and get some impressions, you can of course download the demo right now on Steam, which I of course have played to give the impressions of this game. And the demo essentially includes 2 levels from the main game, which could of course be played in single player or local co-op player mode. So let's get into this game and why I'm fairly excited about this, especially from that Castlevania Bloodstained Curse of the Moon perspective, because of course the developer and publisher of this game is Inti Creates, which of course were famous for not only the excellent Gunvolt series and the Blaster Master Zero remakes, but Bloodstained Curse of the Moon 1 or 2, which started off life as spin-offs of Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, but kind of took on a life of their own and are arguably even more popular than the base game upon they were based upon. So it's very important to talk about Bloodstained Curse of the Moon in this context because that serves as the foundation for what we get in Grim Guardians Demon Purge, which again is coming out for all platforms February 23rd digitally of this year, and which will also be getting a physical release for the PS4, PS5, and Switch only from major retailers later this year. I did watch an interview with the associate producer, Andrew Singleton. They haven't really nailed down a firm date for the physical release as of yet, but I did some snooping on Amazon.com, and I did see a tentative release date of May the 4th, 2023. So something to look forward to. If you play this demo, you really enjoy it, you're wanting to play the full thing, you can get this physically, and we'll get into those details later on. But firstly, let's get into the game and why I think this is special and definitely something you should keep on your radar. So, like I said, this is a 2D side-scrolling action-adventure game, which is based on Bloodstained Curse of the Moon, which itself was based on Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse on the NES. So I want to put this from the outset that I've been reading some forums on this game, and it's been incorrectly described as a Metroidvania, kind of in the vein of Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which visually it shares a lot of similarities with, but again, this isn't like one big castle with interconnected rooms. It's actually multiple levels, but it does have some light Metroidvania elements, which we'll also get into when we cover the gameplay and overview. Very briefly, the story centers around 2 demon hunting sisters known as Shinobu and Maya, who after doing a job are returning to their high school and all of a sudden find out that it has been taken over by demons and transformed into an evil castle. So of course, being seasoned demon hunters, they're on the case. They're gonna go ahead and solve the mystery, kick some demon butt, and also rescue their kidnapped classmates over the course of this quest. That's essentially the story in a nutshell without spoiling too much. Let's get into the gameplay mechanics and what makes this very cool and also separate from Bloodstained Curse of the Moon, which of course Inti Creates also develops. So, very simply and mechanically, you're going to be able to switch on the fly between these two sisters, which have their own unique skill sets. So Shinobu, in the blue, is more of a long-range attack-focused character where she has this submachine gun that has limited ammo that can be refilled at any time, and also has sub-weapons like, for example, throwing knives that can hit enemies that are up high, and then these unlockable bombs that can detonate demons. That's basically her style. She also has a larger health bar than her sister Maya, whereas Maya, I would consider her to be the more overpowered character of the two, but she also has a smaller health bar and specializes in short-range, melee-focused attacks, specifically blade-focused combos, which can hack, slash, and slice enemies in two. Plus, she also has a crawl attack where she can get under small spaces that Shinobu can't, whereas Shinobu can help by delivering attacks from a further range. So they do complement each other, and like I said, you can switch between these two characters on the fly, although it is a bit different than Curse of the Moon, where in Bloodstained Curse of the Moon, you could literally switch a character mid-jump, whereas in Grim Guardians, you actually have to be standing on a platform still to be able to switch the character, kind of slowing down the action a little bit, but giving it its own unique flavor. Now, in terms of sub-weapons, Maya prefers instead to use enchanted origami attacks, whether it's creating a big shield around her that destroys objects and protects against enemy attacks, and also creating little paper cranes that she can use as platforms to get across chasms. So that's essentially the two girls kind of diametrically opposed to each other, but then the girls can actually work together as well by unleashing these devastating purge attacks, which basically can almost kill enemies in one hit. And these are done by filling up a meter at the top of the screen. When you're smashing through objects in the background, you'll not only collect ammunition to fuel your sub attacks, but also fill up your pride meter, which when it's full, you can unleash these devastating attacks. And also by collecting pride, you'll also have in the top right corner of the screen a meter that gives you extra lives the more you collect this pride. So that's essentially the gameplay mechanics in a nutshell. In addition, I did mention that you can also play this game 2-player local co-op, which is kind of cool in the sense that you can actually use each other to solve platforming challenges by jumping off of each other's heads and combining attacks to create these really devastating scenarios. So very cool from that perspective. On top of that, you'll also be able to unlock additional sub-weapons by defeating some of the bosses in this game. And this is where the replayability comes into effect, because you'll notice when you're playing through the levels that there will be certain areas that you can't access, either because you can't jump high enough or maybe because you don't have the right weapon to unlock a door. Whereas when you do attain these additional sub-weapons, you can go to fast travel locations, go back to earlier levels you've already completed, and then find new pathways you couldn't access before. Again, making it very similar to Bloodstained Curse of the Moon, which had this same kind of trope. And again, really adds to the replayability, allows you to go back and find new secrets, and also rescue additional characters you didn't find before. So giving you chances to replay the game and try multiple different pathways. Another really cool thing about the bosses and the game mechanic itself is, let's say you're playing as one of the sisters and you happen to die in battle, then you'll automatically switch to the other sister and you'll have to go and revive the dead sister to get her back into the action. But if you also die before reviving your other sister, then you'll lose one of the lives, because there is definitely a finality to all of this. But how that relates to the bosses is kind of cool too. So I was playing on the Venture difficulty, which is essentially that normal difficulty, because there are 3 levels here. The way it works on veteran or casual difficulty is when you're fighting a boss, let's say you fall in battle, when you bring the other sister into the fray, not only will the corpse of your dead sister be next to the boss so you can revive them right away, but then the boss will have their remaining health intact. So you don't actually have to fight the boss all over again. You can just go in and finish the job. So I thought that was kind of a cool from an accessibility standpoint. But then on that subject, there is another legend difficulty you can unlock when you finally complete the game. So let me just give you a bit of a rundown in terms of how these difficulty levels play out against each other. So I did mention there's a casual difficulty. Essentially, that one is where you can play through the game without getting any knockback damage and you have unlimited lives. So if you really want to just see the story and you're not really great at retro-inspired hardcore platformers, this will probably be the mode for you to get through the game and see all of its content. Whereas the default level is veteran, where you do have knockback damage when you hit an enemy, you have limited lives and shorter health bars. Whereas I did watch a game stream, again, with Andrew Singleton, who is the associate producer on this game, and he did mention that the Legend difficulty is going to have some very cool retro tropes, specifically the fact that when you kill enemies, they will respawn to make it a little bit more frustrating, and of course, the enemy AI will be a bit more aggressive, so for you hardcore players who need a bit more of a challenge and a bit more of a bite to your game, there is that unlockable difficulty, because I will say, compared to Bloodstained and Castlevania, the bosses weren't too big of a deal, and some people have kind of criticized this game for being a little bit on the easy side and the fact that Maya is a bit more of an overpowered character. But again, that'll probably be tuned out through updates, and of course you will get more of a challenge to that Legend difficulty setting. So there's a lot to love about this game. It is a fantastic soundtrack, moody, cool, pixelated visuals that definitely remind me of Castlevania, and especially it's got that kind of Symphony of the Night flair, even though it's not a Metroidvania. If you're really into those old gothic horror action platforming games, I think you'll find a lot to love in this as well. And again, you'll be able to get this on the PS4, PS5, and Switch physically later this year, probably around May for major retailers, and that will be going for $39.99 US, wherever it's located. I found it on Amazon, I found it on Video Games Plus in Canada, so it won't be that hard to find, but in the meantime, you can try the demo out on Steam, and of course, if you just want to get it digitally, it'll be out on February 23rd for all major platformers. Stay tuned. We're coming back with our final game, which is nothing new, but it is a re-release of a game that came out a while back on limited run, and if you missed out on the first time and don't want to pay those high eBay prices, you now have another chance to get it complete on either card or disc via fangamer.com. Stay tuned, this is a good one. We'll be right back. And we're back on episode 41 of The Collecting Confidant with your host, GunstarHero. Of course, we're talking about a trio of hardcore, retro-inspired 2D action platformers. We covered Shinobi Non Grata and Grim Guardian's Demon Purge, which are both available for demo on Steam and are coming out shortly. But now the third game, as I mentioned before the break, is nothing new. This is a very popular game that's been out for a few years and has gotten previous physical releases via limited run games and Play Asia. But of course, if you're worried about all those rising prices, because of course to get Celeste, which we're talking about now, on the PS4 or Switch physically, those prices are pretty exorbitant right now, whereas fangamer.com is doing a re-release on both PS4 and Switch, probably towards June, but you can pre-order them now. And I'm going to assume that the game is complete on cart and disc. I did reach out to Fangamer for comment, but of course they never got back to me. But of course, knowing that the previous limited run releases that came out in October 2019 were also complete on cart and disc, I would make a healthy assumption that you can get the game in its full form, because if you ever got the Japanese version like I did via PlayAsia.com, this game is not complete on disc. This actually does have an update required for its Farewell DLC that came out in September 2019, but the Fangamer versions should have everything intact, and we'll get more into those buy options later. But let's talk about this game. If you've never played Celeste, this is considered by a lot of people to be one of the greatest games of all time. And while I would agree that's an amazing game, I can definitely see why, based on the utter excellence of not only the game design, but how the story speaks to the game design and what it does on a narrative level. In terms of being a total package, this is so excellently crafted and is definitely intended for fans of the old Super Mario Brothers games on NES, specifically Super Mario 3, which served as one of the main influences for this game, as well as maybe newer games like Super Meat Boy, which are very similar. But I would say, as good as Super Meat Boy was back in the day, Celeste just is so much better for so many reasons. And of course, another one of the main influences on this game was Towerfall, which was the previous effort from Matt Makes Games, now known as Extremely OK Games. If you ever played Towerfall, which I have physically on the Switch, this was just an excellent battle game with really tight mechanics, and definitely you can see the influence of Towerfall in terms of how tight Celeste plays and how beautiful the controls are. I just can't gush enough about how expertly crafted this game was, and we'll get into why very shortly. So, from a gameplay perspective and story, very simply, you play as Madeline, a young female who is suffering from depression and anxiety and wants to climb Mount Celeste and reach the summit. Very simply, and of course, over the course of her journey, she's going to be encountering several very unique characters, including Madeline, who is actually a personification of Madeline's own self-doubt that tries to prevent her from reaching the summit. And this is a very emotionally complex and gripping story that I don't want to spoil too much, but being an actual depression survivor and having gone through the gamut of medication and therapy and having come out on the other side, I can definitely say that I related to this game on a very deep emotional level, which was the intent of its creators. They wanted you to have an emotional connection with Madeline on her journey to reach this singularity, which I think they achieved very well. And I feel that the way they've portrayed depression and anxiety was pretty much spot on, even stylistic to a point where it gets very cool. I'll give you an example. During some of the scenes, you'll actually hear little voices going on, which is supposed to be like the voices in Madeline's head. She's obviously suffering from mental illness and some kind of duality. And I would compare it sonically to, say, Hellblade, which had a similar effect of having all these weird voices in the background that would kind of go through the left and right channels to present this inner turmoil. I think it's been handled effectively and even really was self-autobiographical, because this game, the story of itself, didn't really take form until about halfway through the development. Originally, Celeste was just supposed to be a hardcore platforming game about climbing up a mountain, and because the main developer, Maddie Thorson, was experiencing her own depression and anxiety during the development of this game, that started to inform the narrative itself and basically has a lot of similarities and is almost semi-autobiographical, to the point where once this game was completed about a year later, Maddie Thorson actually came out as transgendered, and you'll see a lot of similarities with how the narrative plays out, without spoiling too much again. But let's get back to the game itself, because the game at the end of the day is the heart of this truly amazing experience. And mechanically, it's very simple. You can run, you can jump, you have an air dash attack, which can be replenished when you touch ground. And you also have a wall climb ability, which has a limited amount of stamina attached to it. So if you're clinging onto a wall, you could actually fall off of it if you hold on to it too long. Whereas there's ways of extending that by doing a wall jumping technique, which isn't tied to stamina. And then, of course, when you touch ground, you can replenish that stamina meter. The reason I'm getting into all of this is because you're going to be combining all these different mechanics in conjunction with physics, motion-based gameplay to navigate this extremely difficult but satisfying and fair game. And I'm going to get into the reasons why this is very fair, even though it is very hardcore, because it was designed to appeal to players of all skill levels with this whole mandate in mind of no player left behind. Meaning, the game is very good at teaching you its mechanics and slow dripping these along the course of the narrative, so that way you'll learn the game at a very good pace, and pacing is very important to this game. The development of this game was so particular, it was so extensively play tested to truly honor the emotional experience of the players and also their different skill levels in approaching this game. And that's really where the game comes into its own in terms of having multiple approaches to its overall story and level design. So I'll give you an example. The game itself is broken into 8 main chapters. That's the base game, and each of these chapters have several different sub-levels. And what's nice about this from an accessibility standpoint is that you can save and continue at any point once you reach these checkpoints if you need a break from the action and get right back into it where you left off. The game itself, each level is described as being its own story within a story. So the story of a level, for example, could be you need to jump over a platform, avoid some spikes, dash over and hit a wall on the other side. That's the story itself. That's what the developer is intending for you to do in an overarching concept, but how you execute that story can be done in multiple ways, again, depending on how you've mastered the techniques and what your skill level is. And it's really cool because as you progress the story and learn new techniques based on the mechanics you have at your disposal, you're going to start to learn new things that when you revisit older areas, you'll be able to potentially break the levels and do things that you thought were impossible before that are now possible because you've become more of an expert player with the game. So I love the fact that you evolve as Madeline evolves too, and again, bring that singularity between the game and the player itself. But the game, the way it teaches you, it definitely respects different skill levels. So, for example, if you're kind of like a novice player and not so great at hardcore platformers, you'll be able to get through the game with some resistance, but then if you're also an expert player, there's additional challenges for you to do, because the game itself, it's very inspired by Metroid in the sense that it has these different rooms that are interconnected, but also have multiple branching pathways. But then if you want a bit of an extra challenge, there's also collectibles you can go after, including strawberries, which to get these require you to be an expert platformer. And then there's also secrets you can find, like cassette tapes in each level that are known as B-sides, that when you collect these, you can actually play harder versions of the levels. And then above and beyond that, if you actually finish all the B-side levels, then you can unlock the C-side levels. There's also crystal gems you can try to find to unlock gates. There's a lot of exploration, a lot of secrets, and a lot of content to sink your teeth into. But it is so expertly paced as well to bring you emotionally in line with what Madeline is experiencing. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. There is one scene about early in the game where there's a boss level where you're being chased by Madeline, right? And before you do that, you'll have kind of like this very simpler segment where you're learning this new technique about dashing through these dream walls that when you dash through them, they allow you to fly, right? So it's kind of calm. You learn this new technique, and then all of a sudden you're into this chase mode, being chased by Madeline, where it gets all panicky and hardcore, and you have this really tense experience. But then when you finally finish that chase scene, you get into like this moderate, non-challenging platforming coda to this. So again, giving you a chance to breathe, compose yourself before you get into the next challenge, which was very deliberate because they described the development of this game, again, was extensively play tested. They got a lot of people to play these levels, and then based on the feedback they were getting, they would refine them or maybe even scrap entire levels altogether that didn't fit the mood. So there was definitely deliberate and nuanced techniques that were infused in this game that makes it as brilliant as it is. It was a labor of love that truly shows in its finished product. I can't speak highly enough about how great the mechanics are, and in terms of just how much it teaches you and how much you can break the game by just learning advanced techniques. And when I did mention how there was that no player left behind mentality, if you're finding the game too difficult, you can also turn on the assist mode, which allows you to change different variables. Like, for example, you can slow the game down. You can have infinite air dashes, infinite stamina as well. When you fall into a pit, it won't kill you. So again, if you're not into hardcore platformers, but you still want to see the story, you can have a helping hand and customize your experience. Now, the one controversial aspect about that, from a trophy hunting or achievement hunting perspective, is the fact that you can actually platinum this game on easy mode, which is going to be controversial to some people, but again, is in line with the overall intent of the developer to make this accessible to a wide variety of skill levels. And in addition to that, the DLC called Farewell, which was released on September 2019, which represents the final 9th chapter, is utterly insanely challenging and is basically about as long as the main game itself. So there's just so much for you to sink your teeth into. And if you did miss out on the limited run release or the Play Asia release and don't want to pay those high prices, luckily you'll be able to get another stab at it via fangamer.com, now open for pre-order for the PS4 and the Switch. And I believe they're going to start shipping in around June 2023. Of course, there are going to be two versions: the standard version for $35 US, which includes either the cart and the disc, and I'm going to assume all the DLC content on there. And of course, if you're a huge Celeste fan, you can get the collector's edition for $64 US, which is going to include a lot of other goodies like a big box, a art album, a journey, digital soundtrack, and some other cool collectibles. So again, from fangamer.com, you can go for open pre-order now. This has been another jam-packed episode of The Collecting Confidant, episode 41 with your host, GunstarHero. Make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll see you again on the next one. Later, Game Chasers, and peace.